The other figure is O Mahoney, a nationalist MP who, from an Anglo-Irish background, who came here in the early 20th century to found an orphanage, because after the Ireland and uprising, in which there was a very savage repression of an uprising against the Ottoman Empire, there were a lot of orphans.
Pierce Charles de Lacy O'Mahony was born in 1850 to a well-to-do Anglo-Irish family who made their fortune as lawyers. And his father died shortly after he was born, and 6 years later his mother remarried a colonel in the British Army. So we know that he spent some of his life in Leamington Spa in England and some of his life at the family estates in Kilmorna in County Kerry in the southwest of Ireland. He seems to have been very much interested in humanitarian affairs in Ireland, and certainly there was much to be interested there. There was a lot of poverty. Later he became a member of Parliament in the British Parliament for North Meath in Ireland, and he was a member of Parnell's Home Rule Party. Later on he studied and became a barrister. He inherited another family estate in Wicklow. In the 1905 book by Boris Mandushev about the St. Patrick Orphanage, he attributes Pierce's inspiration to go to Bulgaria to reading an article written by James Boucher in the Daily News. And I think Boucher's writings were quite stirring, they were quite graphic in describing the problems. The orphanage itself was officially opened in 1904 in Sofia, and I have record of him almost, which is remarkable given that there were no aeroplanes, commuting between Bulgaria and Ireland, because he was still active in Irish politics with the Irish Party, and he was writing letters to the papers and to other politicians. And then back in Bulgaria he was spending time about the business of the orphanage. In 1909 he accepted or adopted Bulgarian Orthodoxy as his faith, and he celebrated that by commissioning a fresco at the monastery of St. Nicholas at Miglish near Stara Zagora, which depicts St. Cyril and St. Methodius and St. Patrick, bringing together the saints who brought Christianity to the Slavic world and the saint who brought Christianity to Ireland. In the constitution of the orphanage, he specified that they had to be boys, they had to be of a particular age, around about 11 I think on average, and they had to be in good health, because he didn't want the health of some orphans affecting the health of others. And there were interviews held, and they were assessed for suitability, that they could be developed into being good members of society, and he actually used those phrases in some of his letters. And they came from three areas, Burgas, Plovdiv and Dubnica. He brought four to Ireland. We have definite information about three of them. Pierce O'Mahony, I think, was quite selective about which orphans he took. He was looking for potential for further education. The orphans who remained in Bulgaria, he saw to it they received military commissions, trades, professions, whatever was suitable to their ability. And I suspect that Eftim and the other three were selected for having the most potential. Eftim Ivanov, he was put through agricultural college, and shortly before Pierce O'Mahony died, he received a bequest of £1,000, which was a lot of money at that time, and he bought a farm, and then he married a local girl, and very happily there's a very large number of descendants of Eftim Ivanov living in Wicklow in Ireland.
I'm half Bulgarian. My father was Bulgarian. He came to this country in 1909 as part of a group of students introduced to Ireland to finish their education here, so as that I think the O'Mahony was the man that brought him over, and he had an orphanage in Bulgaria which he had set up in 1903. These students he picked to bring over here, and they went for different studies. My father studied agriculture and eventually became estate manager for the O Mahoney. And when O Mahoney died, he eventually bought this farm after much searching. Myself and my brothers grew up, we progressed a bit. That's how we came to be here now. Basically, we're more Irish than the Irish, sort of like the Normans. And the farm was developed reasonably well, I suppose.
As the orphans got older, the mission at the orphanage drew to a close in 1914, and of course this coincided with the Great War. And the orphanage was closed. He parted company amicably with Sir Ferdinand of Bulgaria, who had been a patron of the orphanage, and received the decoration, the Order of Civil Merit, from Ferdinand. Piers O'Mahony is unique, in my opinion, in having been decorated by the kings of two opposing sides in the First World War. First of all, Sir Ferdinand of Bulgaria, giving him the Order of Civil Merit for his work in the orphanage in Sofia, and then the King of England for his work in recruiting Irish soldiers to fight in the British Army, on the opposing side to Bulgaria, incidentally. So, something I found quite amusing in my research into the story was coming across a succession of pictures of him at different parts of his life. The next picture I can recall is of him in typical Slavic winter wear with what we would describe as a Russian hat. And then later on again, he's dressed in the same uniform as the orphans. I think it is the traditional dress of people from the Debar region of Bulgaria. And then I think the next picture I have of him is in British Army uniform as a recruiter for the British Army. And then later on again, he began to evolve into a character from Irish mythology, wearing an Irish kilt and having a big Celtic brooch and having an Irish wolf hand beside him. He wrote a series of rhetorical letters called Bulgaria and the Powers. This was arguing the circumstances of Bulgaria, why it took the actions it did relative to the great powers in what was then known as the Great War. Then we also know that his affection continued. People came to visit him, not politically, just personally, from the friends that he'd made in Bulgaria. Katerina Karavelov is one of the names that appears in the guest book of his house in the Wicklow Mountains. And then in 1929, which is the year in which James David Boucher died, he wrote a letter to the local newspapers arguing very strongly what would have been a very unpopular view, that certainly in Ireland and in Britain, that Bulgaria should be spared severe reparations because there were understandable reasons for Bulgaria allying itself to Germany in the Great War.
Today, the orphanage is completely demolished, but the street where it once stood proudly bears the name of Piers O'Mahony, ensuring a place of pride for this unique Irishman in Bulgarian folklore and history.